The WNBA is currently promoting its 30th anniversary season and selling thousands of tickets.
Nobody cares! You think the NBA, that they wouldn't tell their networks to start talking about their league to get the word out to the public? If there's no NBA season, ESPN loses drastically. ABC, drastically. Disney, drastically. You don't think they'd start pushing propaganda because they have so much money to lose if there's no season? But why aren't they doing that with the WNBA? I'm concerned that propaganda needs to be put out there to save the WNBA season, to put some pressure. Your Stephen A. Smiths, your Colin Cowherds, First Take, Jason Whitlock, First Things First with Nick Wright. They haven't uttered a single syllable about the WNBA and what's going on with CBA negotiations. They just don't care.
Despite the lack of a signed labor contract for the upcoming year, this situation has created a state of legal limbo where existing regulations remain in place while owners and players negotiate in New York. While the league continues its public-facing operations, the internal tension suggests a significant disconnect between marketing and the reality of the boardroom. Mainstream sports media has remained largely silent on the possibility of a work stoppage. In the NFL or NBA, a potential lockout 2 months away would dominate the news cycle. However, coverage of the WNBA remains focused on highlights in the draft, potentially to avoid damaging the league's recent commercial momentum. Despite this lack of visibility, former executives are warning players that the owner's position is firm and the prospect of a strike is becoming increasingly tangible. The dispute centers on how revenue is calculated. The Players Association recently lowered its demand to 27.5% of gross revenue. In response, owners proposed a 70% share, but specified it would come from net revenue, the amount remaining after all operating expenses, including travel and security, are deducted. The union argues that this accounting method would reduce the players' actual take to less than 15% of the total revenue, viewing the offer as a strategic attempt to minimize the payout. Disagreements have also extended to player housing. While the league has historically provided accommodations, a necessity for players on 5-figure salaries in expensive markets, owners now propose phasing this out. The owners argue that higher projected salaries should cover these costs. The union counters that the wealth is not evenly distributed, and losing team-provided housing in cities like New York or Los Angeles would be a significant financial burden for rookies and veterans on minimum contracts. The surge in popularity driven by Caitlin Clark is being interpreted differently by both sides. Owners view the recent financial influx as a temporary phenomenon and project hundreds of millions in losses if they meet the union's demands. Conversely, players point to the $2.2 billion media deal and $250 million in expansion fees as evidence of the league's rising valuation. They are seeking a share of the growth that reflects their market value rather than accepting incremental raises. The stalemate has halted progress for new franchises in Toronto and Portland. Expansion drafts cannot proceed without a defined salary cap, which requires a ratified collective bargaining agreement. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has maintained a public stance of confidence, yet NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has reportedly urged both sides to reach a resolution. Players have already authorized a strike, and owners appear to be testing the union's willingness to disrupt the league's current momentum. If a deal is not reached by March, the free agency period affecting approximately 80% of the roster will be stalled. This could lead to the first work stoppage in WNBA history at a time when the league is seeing record engagement. The current impasse reflects a fundamental disagreement over leverage. Owners believe the players depend on the league's infrastructure, while the players maintain that the value of the league is tied directly to their presence on the court. As the deadline approaches, the risk grows that the league's most significant opportunity for growth could be compromised by the inability to reach an agreement. The historical context of this labor dispute is rooted in the 2020 collective bargaining agreement, which was initially hailed as a landmark achievement for women's professional sports. At the time, the deal significantly increased the maximum salary and introduced maternity benefits, but it also implemented a strict prioritization clause. This rule requires players with more than 2 years of experience to report to their WNBA teams by the start of training camp or face suspension for the entire season. For decades, WNBA players have supplemented their relatively modest domestic incomes by playing for European and Asian clubs during the winter, where salaries often triple or quadruple what they earn in the United States. By forcing players to choose between their overseas commitments and the WNBA, the league effectively removed a primary financial lifeline for many veterans. The current negotiations represent the first opportunity for the union to challenge these restrictions, which they argue are unfair given the league's refusal to match the pay scales offered by international clubs. The financial architecture of the WNBA is uniquely complex due to its historical and ongoing relationship with the NBA. The NBA currently owns approximately 50% of the WNBA, a legacy of the league's founding as a subsidiary of the men's organization. While this relationship provided essential stability during the WNBA's early years, it has now become a point of contention. Revenue generated by the WNBA is often funneled through the NBA's accounting systems, leading to debates over transparency. Players argue that the league's reported losses are a byproduct of how costs are allocated between the two organizations. For example, if the WNBA is charged for administrative services or marketing overhead provided by the NBA, it can create the appearance of a deficit even if the league's direct revenue is growing. The union is now demanding a clearer separation of these accounts to ensure that the revenue-sharing models are based on the actual performance of the WNBA as an independent entity. This demand for transparency coincides with a dramatic shift in how WNBA franchises are valued. In 2023, the Golden State Valkyries paid a record $50 million expansion fee to join the league. Just months later, reports emerged that subsequent expansion teams in Toronto and Portland were being valued closer to $100 million or more. These figures represent a massive departure from the past, where teams were often sold for less than $10 million. The players see these skyrocketing valuations as proof that the league's future is already priced into its present assets. They contend that it is illogical to ask players to accept austerity measures or net revenue calculations, while the owners are sitting on assets that have increased in value by 500% in less than 3 years. The owners, however, maintain that valuation and cash flow are not the same. They argue that while the teams may be worth more on paper, the day-to-day operations still require significant capital injections that the current revenue streams cannot yet cover. The infrastructure gap between franchises is another critical pillar of the current dispute. Currently, there is a stark divide in how players are treated depending on their market. The Las Vegas Aces and the Seattle Storm have invested tens of millions of dollars into dedicated, state-of-the-art practice facilities. In contrast, other teams still share public gymnasiums or university facilities, often resulting in scheduling conflicts and substandard training environments. The union is pushing for league-wide standards that would mandate minimum requirements for facilities, medical staff, and nutrition. This is not merely a matter of comfort. It is a labor issue concerning workplace safety and career longevity. The players argue that if the league wants to market itself as a premier global destination for talent, it cannot allow a situation where some players are training in world-class centers while others are effectively nomadic. The specifics of the 11-year, $2.2 billion media rights deal shared with the NBA and USA Basketball also present a hurdle. While the WNBA's share of this deal is roughly $200 million per year, a massive increase from the previous $60 million, it is still a fraction of the total package. Union leadership has expressed concern that the WNBA's value was used as a sweetener for the NBA's negotiations rather than being negotiated as a standalone product. They point to the soaring viewership numbers for the 2024 season as evidence that the league could have commanded an even higher price if it had waited for the current growth cycle to peak. Because the deal is locked in for over a decade, the players feel they are being forced into a long-term agreement based on outdated market assumptions. They are seeking reopener clauses that would allow for salary adjustments if the league's media revenue exceeds certain benchmarks before the contract expires. Another point of friction involves the league's marketing and licensing rights. Under the current system, the league retains a significant portion of the revenue generated from jersey sales and individual player merchandise. In other major sports leagues, high-profile players receive a direct cut of their specific jersey sales. In the WNBA, that money is often pooled or retained by the league for general operations. For a player like Caitlin Clark, whose jersey sold out within hours of her being drafted, the lack of a direct licensing share represents a significant loss of potential income. The union is advocating for a licensing model that mirrors the NBA, where players receive a percentage of their individual brand value. This would allow the league to maintain its collective marketing power while rewarding the individuals who are driving the most significant commercial interest. The technical debate over the salary cap versus hard cap is where the legal teams are spending the most time. The WNBA currently operates under a hard cap, meaning teams cannot exceed the salary limit for any reason. This prevents teams from retaining their own drafted talent if they have already committed high salaries to other veterans. In the NBA, bird rights allow teams to exceed the cap to re-sign their own players, which encourages roster stability and fan engagement. The WNBA is demanding a soft cap with luxury tax provisions. This would allow wealthy owners who are willing to pay a penalty to keep their championship rosters together. The owners have resisted this, fearing that it would create a super team era where only the richest owners in the biggest markets can compete for titles. They argue that the current hard cap is the only thing maintaining competitive balance in a league with only 12 teams. The stakes are further complicated by the rookie scale contracts. Currently, even the top picks in the draft are locked into 4-year deals that pay less than $100,000 annually. For the 2024 class, which brought unprecedented attention to the league, these salaries were widely criticized as being out of sync with the players' economic impact. The union wants a drastic restructuring of the rookie scale to ensure that the next generation of stars is compensated in a way that reflects their immediate contribution to the league's growth. They are proposing a model where a portion of the media rights revenue is specifically earmarked for rookie bonuses and escalating salary tiers. As the negotiations continue, the role of the individual owners has become increasingly polarized. There is a visible rift between the legacy owners, who have been with the league since its inception and often prioritize fiscal conservatism, and the new guard owners who come from tech or private equity backgrounds. This new group tends to view the WNBA as a growth stage startup rather than a traditional sports league, and they are generally more willing to deficit spend in the short term to capture long-term market share. This internal disagreement among owners makes it difficult for Commissioner Kathy Engelbert to present a unified front. The legacy owners are concerned that agreeing to the union's demands will make their teams unprofitable for the foreseeable future, while the new owners worry that a strike will destroy the momentum they just spent millions to acquire. The looming March deadline for free agency is the primary pressure point. If 80% of the league enters the spring without a contract, the logistics of starting the season on time become nearly impossible. Training camps typically begin in late April, leaving a very narrow window for hundreds of players to sign deals, relocate, and clear physicals. The union has reportedly advised players to begin saving a portion of their 2024 salaries in anticipation of a work stoppage, a move that signals they are prepared for a long-term holdout. This financial preparation is a key part of their leverage. In previous labor disputes, owners relied on the fact that WNBA players didn't have the savings to survive a missed season. With the rise of lucrative domestic endorsements and the growth of the unrivaled 3-on-3 league, many top players now have alternative income streams that make a strike more viable than it was in the past. Legal experts have noted that the WNBA's status quo period is governed by federal labor law, which requires both sides to bargain in good faith even after a contract has expired. However, good faith is a broad term that does not require either side to make concessions. If the owners refuse to move on the gross revenue demand, the union could file an unfair labor practice charge with the National Labor Relations Board. This would trigger a federal investigation that could drag on for months, further clouding the league's future. The potential for government intervention adds another layer of risk that both sides would prefer to avoid, yet neither seems willing to blink first. The broader economic impact of a WNBA strike would extend far beyond the players and owners. Arena staff, local vendors, and broadcast partners all have millions of dollars tied to the 44-game schedule. For the city of Indianapolis or the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, the loss of WNBA dates would represent a significant hit to their summer revenue. This external pressure may eventually force the hand of local governments or major corporate sponsors to act as mediators. However, until there is a fundamental shift in how revenue is defined in the boardroom, these external pressures are unlikely to resolve the core philosophical divide. The league is currently at a crossroads where it must decide if it is ready to function as a major professional sports entity with the associated costs and risks, or if it will continue to operate under a model designed for a different era of women's sports. The resolution of this conflict will set the precedent for every women's professional league for the next decade, making this negotiation one of the most consequential moments in the history of the sport. The shift toward full-time charter travel represents one of the most significant financial shifts in the league's history, yet it has become a central point of contention in the current negotiations. In 2024, the league committed roughly $25 million per year to ensure all teams flew private for the duration of the season and playoffs. While this was a major victory for player health and safety, owners are now attempting to categorize this expenditure as a fringe benefit that should be deducted from the player's share of total revenue. The union views this as a regressive stance, arguing that professional travel standards are a baseline operational cost of a major league, not a substitute for salary increases. They contend that using the cost of charters to justify lower base pay ignores the fact that private travel actually protects the owner's primary assets, the players, by reducing injury risk and fatigue-related performance declines. This debate over operational costs coincides with the emergence of alternative domestic basketball opportunities, most notably the unrivaled 3-on-3 league. Founded by Players for Players, this venture offers six-figure salaries during the winter months, effectively providing a financial buffer that previous generations of WNBA players lacked. For the first time, a significant portion of the workforce does not have to rely on the WNBA's prioritization rules or overseas contracts to maintain their standard of living. This new economic reality has fundamentally altered the leverage in the boardroom. If players can earn a comparable or superior monthly wage playing 3-on-3 domestically, their willingness to sit out a WNBA season increases significantly. The league's monopoly on high-level professional women's basketball in North America is no longer absolute, and the union is using this newfound competition to demand a contract that reflects a global market for talent. The internal mechanics of the WNBA's revenue sharing are also under scrutiny regarding how basketball-related income is defined. In the NBA, this definition is exhaustive, covering everything from arena naming rights to parking and concessions. In the WNBA, the definition has historically been much narrower, often excluding significant portions of local sponsorship deals and subsidiary income. The players are now pushing for a total revenue model that mirrors the transparency found in the men's league. They argue that as teams move into their own dedicated arenas, such as the Seattle Storm's new practice facility and the Las Vegas Aces headquarters, the lines between team revenue and real estate or event revenue have blurred. Without a comprehensive audit and a broader definition of shared income, the players believe they are being locked out of the most lucrative parts of the business. The role of private equity in the league has also introduced a new layer of complexity. Recent investments from firms like Sixth Street and Redbird Capital have brought a return on investment mindset to the ownership groups. These investors are often more focused on long-term valuation and exit strategies than traditional owners who may have viewed the league as a community asset or a passion project. For the players, this influx of institutional capital is a double-edged sword. While it provides the cash necessary for expansion and infrastructure, it also means the owners are under intense pressure to show a path to profitability. This pressure often manifests as a refusal to increase the rookie scale or a desire to cut unnecessary costs like team-provided housing. The union is essentially negotiating against Wall Street analysts as much as they are against basketball executives, leading to a clash between financial models and human labor needs. The impact of the 11-year media deal remains a primary source of frustration for the veteran core of the league. Because the WNBA's rights were bundled with the NBA and USA Basketball, the players feel the true market value of the women's game was never tested in an open bidding war. They point to the women's NCAA tournament, which saw a massive spike in its standalone media rights value, as evidence that the WNBA could have commanded a premium rate if it had decoupled from the men's league negotiations. To address this, the union is demanding look-back provisions. These clauses would require the league and its broadcast partners to reevaluate the deal every 3 years. If viewership or advertising rates exceed specified thresholds, a mandatory kicker would trigger an automatic increase in the salary cap. Owners have resisted this, citing the need for long-term budget certainty to satisfy their investors and creditors. Beyond the financial figures, the dispute involves fundamental questions of player agency, particularly regarding the draft and free agency. The recent collective bargaining agreement in the NWSL, which eliminated the college draft and moved toward a system of unrestricted free agency for all players, has set a high watermark for women's professional sports. WNBA players are increasingly vocal about the restrictive nature of the core designation, which allows a team to prevent its star player from entering free agency by offering a 1-year maximum contract. This effectively keeps elite talent trapped in markets they may wish to leave, limiting their ability to capitalize on their individual brands in larger media hubs. The union is pushing to reduce the number of times a player can be cored and to lower the years of service required for unrestricted free agency, moves that owners fear will lead to a consolidation of talent in a few powerhouse markets. The league's expansion strategy is also being used as a bargaining chip. While Toronto and Portland are confirmed, there are plans to reach 16 teams by 2028. Each new team brings in a massive expansion fee, money that currently goes directly to the existing owners and the league office, with 0% allocated to the players. The union argues that expansion dilutes the talent pool and increases the physical demands on the players through a more grueling travel schedule. They are proposing that a percentage of all expansion fees be placed into a player transition fund or a pension program. Owners view expansion fees as capital contributions meant to recoup their years of operating losses, and they have shown little interest in sharing these one-time windfalls with the current workforce. As the calendar moves toward the March deadline, the role of corporate sponsors will become increasingly pivotal. Companies like Nike, Google, and AT&T have invested hundreds of millions into the WNBA Changemakers program, a partnership designed to elevate the league's profile. These sponsors have a vested interest in seeing the 2026 season proceed without interruption. If the league goes dark, these brands lose their primary summer marketing platform. There is growing speculation that these changemakers may exert behind-the-scenes pressure on the league office to find a compromise. However, the union is also aware that these brands value their relationships with the individual players, many of whom have their own direct endorsement deals. This creates a scenario where the players have soft power that extends beyond the boardroom, as they can leverage their personal social media reaches to explain their side of the labor fight directly to the public. The final hurdle in these negotiations is the revenue trigger itself. Under the 2020 CBA, the players were only eligible for revenue sharing if the league met certain growth targets that many analysts deemed unreachable in the short term. The union is now demanding that revenue sharing begins at the first dollar of growth, rather than after an arbitrary threshold is met. They want a shared risk, shared reward model where their compensation is tied directly to the league's success from day one. Owners, however, maintain that they must be allowed to recover their initial investment before sharing profits. This philosophical divide between labor seeing themselves as partners in growth and management seeing labor as a cost to be managed is the core of the stalemate. Without a fundamental shift in how the league views its players as economic stakeholders, the risk of a total work stoppage remains the most likely outcome for the 2026 season.